So, willkommen in London, willkommen beim Webinar des Außenwirtschaftscenters London rund um die Trends und Chancen im britischen Wohn- und Hochbau. Danke, dass Sie mit uns dabei sind. Mein Name ist Michael Müller. Ich bin der Wirtschaftsdelegierte hier am Außenwirtschaftscenter der WKÖ in London. Warum bieten wir dieses Webinar an? Die einfache Erklärung, das Vereinigte Königreich ist die sechstgrößte Weltwirtschaft. Und das hat natürlich zur Folge, dass auch der Baumarkt oder der Bausektor von wahnsinniger Größe ist. Und wir sehen, dass eigentlich laufend österreichische Unternehmen beteiligt sind an ganz unterschiedlichen Projekten im Baubereich, von Infrastruktur über Hochbau, Holzbau, Zulieferung. Und das, was wir auch sehen, ist, dass gerade die Charakteristika österreichischer Firmen, die dazu beitragen, dass sie Erfolg hier am Markt haben, dass das Charakteristika und Themen sind, die am britischen Markt über die Jahre an Bedeutung gewonnen haben und weiter gewinnen werden. So, bevor wir beginnen, einige kurze Housekeeping Rules. Und die erste, die Sie hier auf der Folie nicht sehen, ist, dass wir heute ein bisschen eine Mischung haben werden aus einem Webinar auf Deutsch und auf Englisch. Der Großteil der Präsentationen wird auf Englisch sein. Sie können gerne Fragen stellen, sowohl auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch im Chat. Und dadurch, dass wir heute auch eine intimere Runde sind, können wir Sie auch, wenn Sie dann in der Q&A-Session am Schluss des Webinars eine Frage selbst stellen möchten, können wir Ihnen auch gerne das Mikrofon freischalten. Wir, das Außenwirtschaftscenter, berät pro Jahr ungefähr 950 österreichische Unternehmen. Das heißt, wenn es komplexe Sachverhalte gibt, kann man die gerne sowohl mit uns weiter besprechen, als natürlich auch Themen mit unseren Vortragenden weiterführen. Und die Präsentation, die Sie sehen werden, es wird eine Reihe an Folien geben, als auch die Aufzeichnung bekommen Sie in einigen Tagen zugeschickt. So, kurz zu unserem Ablauf. And let's switch to English. So you already know who I am, and I'll have the pleasure to introduce and hand over to my colleague, Peter Franklin, who is our Senior Sector Manager for the construction sector and has been supporting Austrian companies for the last 15 plus years. And after that, I would say we'll have the main presentation. We're very grateful for Mike Pitts from Innovate UK, so a state agency to support innovation and sectoral transformation and supply chains, who brings more than 10 years of expertise in the built environment and sustainable construction to the table. And he will talk us through how UK policy is opening up opportunities for the Austrian supply chain here on the British market. Followed by Andreas Kaufmann, who has been recently appointed Managing Director of Internorm Windows in the UK, how this very well-known brand, I would even say a household name in Austria, has over the years gained a foothold in the British market, which sort of works a bit differently than we know from Austria. And last but not least, Eleanor Hall from the 19 Group will give us a snapshot why the London Build and Elemental exhibition is the one event nobody in the construction sector should miss. So you see, we have a full program ahead. I will ask all speakers to please stick to the timing. And for me, a last 1 minute about what we've been seeing in Austrian exports and Austrian investment in the UK. Given the overall doom and gloom of the last years with constant geopolitical crisis, energy price shocks, and so on and so forth, we've basically seen quite a good development. Last year, Austrian exports of goods to the UK increased by almost 7%. And the UK now ranks 9th as the most important trading partner for the Austrian economy. So for us, it's a very essential market. And services, it's rank 5. And Austrian companies are heavily invested, including in the construction supply chain. So nobody really knows honestly how the current geopolitical crisis will turn out or how long it will take to resolve. What one can say is that before the crisis started, the UK was on track to see a GDP growth of sort of 1.2, 1.3% in 2026. Those forecasts have now been put down to just below 1%. So this is where we are. And with further ado, Peter, please take over, and let's kick off and start with our main topic, UK construction.
Yes, so thank you, Michael. So you've heard the UK construction market. It is big. We should always say that to our Austrian audience. It's a very open market with a lot of international players, but that makes it competitive. Price is often a driver, but Austrian companies find most of their success, or most Austrian companies find success in niche markets. And that's really what you need to try to identify coming as an Austrian supplier. You need to try to identify what are the market needs, what's driving the market, and that will be the rising population, among other things. We're going to be overtaking Germany by some counts in some years' time. And that leads to a high need for housing, which we're going to hear more about, and other social infrastructure. High energy prices, high cost of living, and net zero targets are all building into the construction landscape and changing the landscape and changing it into a sector that makes it in a way much more exciting for many Austrian suppliers of sustainable technologies, innovative technologies, innovative materials, and this is some of the strengths that Austria has, and some of you listening today have as well. Where is Austria strong? That's where you're strong. Deliverability is the other thing you always bear in mind, and I think we might hear a little bit more about that from Andreas Kaufmann later. Make sure you've got the right partners in place in the UK. Make sure you're explaining properly what your product is to a UK market. That means, what's the return on investment, particularly if you're selling more on quality and long-term value. Make sure that technical information is available. Is your product compatible? Does it fit in with does it plug in, if you like, to the system here in the UK? And make sure you've got your import and distribution strategy correct. Finally, I would say it's a complex market. It does require some time and money to invest in really building up a network, and it's a market that relies on building a long-standing network. You need to be committed. People want to build long relationships. So it very much relies on coming over, meeting people face to face. And with that in mind, if we just show the next slide, our next big event here in the UK in November, our next big Austrian pavilion, which we're planning, will be at the London Build and Elemental London show, which is a big platform, and you're going to hear more about that, so I won't say more about that now. Eleanor will speak more about that show later. I am now going to hand over, I think we're okay for time, hand straight over to our first key speaker, Mike Pitts from Innovate UK. Mike, it's all yours.
Grüß Gott. Good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be able to talk to you here today. So just as Innovate UK, the organisation I work for is the UK Government's Innovation Agency, and I've been asked to do this today coming from a perspective where I've run two of the largest kind of big investments from government into the construction sector in the last decade, as we seek to make it ready for the future. And so we're coming from some of that kind of perspective in terms of the kind of trends and opportunities. So on the next slide, as part of that role that I have to keep reminding construction and the wider reminding the government of the construction is much more than just that part, the building part. So the built environment sector within the UK, when you bring in all the bits that get forgotten, like architecture and services and manufacturing supply chains, is actually around a quarter of our national gross value added, and accounts for something like 3.8 million jobs. That's 12% of the workforce. So it's far bigger than financial services, which you always hear lots about. It's far bigger than automotive and aerospace combined, which always seem to get all the government's attention. Creative industries is also very important in the UK. We're 4 times bigger than that. And the problem is the focus on this bigger sector is blurred because it's split across lots of government departments in terms of what matters. So on the next slide, just starting to talk through some of the trends here. The big issue really that we've been trying to tackle for quite a long time, and this is a global issue, is around productivity. If we can close that productivity gap between construction and the rest of the economy, the value of that is something like 2% of UK GDP, which is not surprising given what we've just seen in terms of the full scale. And that would pretty much pay for 2/3 of the UK's 10-year infrastructure pipeline. It's a huge amount of work. Productivity is an interesting one because per worker productivity isn't bad. It's per worker hour productivity is where we're really behind. So that's really a lot about how we much more efficiently manage our work flows, and that's something we'll kind of come back to. So on the next slide, the big crisis for the government really is around housing. There's not enough housing within the UK. And it's quite an emergency. The government has a target of 300,000 new homes every year, and you can see the historic performance is quite short of that. And kind of bridging that gap is a current focus for government in things like speeding up planning and other aspects. So that's an important trend to think about. The other big trend on the next slide is to talk about how we are decarbonising our buildings. So removing all the emissions associated with the built environment. As you can see here, just in terms of buildings, the breakdown for the UK is around a quarter of our emissions are associated with heating, space and water in buildings. And on the next slide, you can see why. It's because in terms of the mix across typical European countries, we are more committed than most to natural gas as our, or natural fossil gas as our source of heating. We are the fastest growing heat pump market in Europe, coming from a low base, of course, and that's a big opportunity, the need, and that's accelerating at the moment with some of the issues that are happening globally. This desire to very quickly move away from gas and onto an electrified heating system. There's an ambition within government to have a net zero energy system by 2030 and to be the fastest decarbonising economy in the world. On the next slide, the way that's kind of tracked is through the Climate Change Committee and the carbon budgets that are set by government. We've now got the 7th carbon budget, but the 6th carbon budget matters a lot when you're in innovation because it kind of gives you that route through the next 7 or so years up to 2035 to 7 to 10 year kind of horizons we tend to work with. And you can see there's a huge need for bringing forward, in particular, the orange band there around electrification being one of the big drivers for meeting net zero within the UK. It's a huge part of it, along with low carbon energy. And the next slide, you can see the breakdown for the built environment sector. And this green swathe in the middle, more than half of it, as you can see, is entirely around low carbon heating. So tackling that problem I talked about before, and you can see as a sector, it's one of the biggest ones to change. Surface transport and built environment are the two big areas that have to change drastically within the UK and are possibly not on track. Just flick through the next slide kind of quickly. It's slightly out of date now, but there's a lot of analysis suggests that our policy gap there's a policy gap there. Go back one slide, sorry, please. In terms of and the challenge around decarbonising heat is just a huge variation and the large difference between the energy demand from gas and electricity. This is, although this is old data, it still stands relatively true in terms of the variation in demand and managing that within a network that's adding more and more renewables all the time. So if we just flick to the next slide, we can see what we're trying to move between within the UK is the kind of energy flows we kind of have today. And you can see the majority on this Sankey diagram suggests that the big two problems are our use of fossil gas for heating and our use of petrol and diesel for road transport. They're the two that really need to shift. They're the big two sticky problems, and we very much own the gas challenge. The next slide shows you where we expect to be by 2050 within the UK, and you can see the majority of this is then now coming from renewables. So these are some of the kind of pathways that our National Grid, our electrical operators are working towards, and all of their kind of forward planning is based on these. So flipping to the next slide, and I do appreciate there's a lot of detail on all of these. What I'm hoping is you can get some time to go through them afterwards. I'm giving you the kind of highlights. So the big opportunity that we see within this space around buildings is in the decarbonisation side of it. The heating, as you can see from this kind of EMBA report, it's completely technically feasible to electrify all heating within buildings, but it's the one that hasn't happened. And if you look at where investment's gone into the clean tech space, the electrified heat is the yellow band on the bar chart on the left. Very, very small, but growing. And that's because the technology is largely there. Most of it, this is about how we roll this out. It's been slower. And the opportunity that we see in this space is because of the lack of data to be able to model this. The finance sector do want to put the money forward. The investment is there to come, but we're still largely basing this on human assessment rather than real world data. And this digital opportunity is where we're working really hard at Innovate UK to support businesses that can pull that kind of thing forward. And if you just see on the next slide, that then goes with that basis that this is an area where we will see the technology cost curve come down over time. As we learn, as we do more installations, as the scale of delivery of various technologies grows, what we see is the cost comes down per energy delivered over time. Nothing more dramatic than solar, offshore and onshore wind, huge drops in costs. They start to become more cost competitive than the things that they're replacing, like fossil gas and coal. Let's not talk about nuclear energy. Okay, so next slide, please. All this is some kind of context there for the kind of drivers and policy that government have put into place. So there's 4 big important things to understand at the moment that the government are really working hard to push through and create some of the opportunities. The first one is a full revision of our national planning framework. This is what slows down delivery of a lot of house building and infrastructure. And really, it's starting to set a presumption in favour that if it's a sustainable development and meets housing targets, it should be preferred and not blocked by local communities. It's far too easy to block planning or slow it down. And we are really good in the UK at going through in fine detail and making sure everything complies and adding cost to projects. And government are very aware of that. However, on the second side of it, we don't want these things to be unsafe. You'll be very aware of the Grenfell tragedy that happened in London a few years ago, and all the kind of stuff that's come out since that has led to setting up what we now call a building safety regulator, which mandates there should be a golden thread of information flowing right the way through from the manufactured products to what's in the buildings. And again, these are things we're building into that stuff that we're doing in innovation around making sure that digital information around buildings is much more available so we can plan and deliver projects much better. The next slide for the next 2 really important drivers, of course, now is the Warm Homes Plan. This was published earlier this year by the government, and this sets out how and their ambitions for, in the next 3 to 4 years, upgrading 5 million homes within the UK. So improving them in terms of their energy performance. In some that I mean in more insulation. In the majority that I mean adding solar generation, as well as potentially heat pumps, and electrifying those homes to get them away from gas and cut their fuel bills. This is becoming more and more important in the current context, and there's talk right now about accelerating that and breaking the link between energy costs, electricity costs and gas costs. There's also the Future Home Standard, which has only just been kind of released and is being implemented in a staged way right the way through to 2027. And this really is to just make sure that all buildings are built to the stage where they are what they call net zero ready, which means when the energy system by 2030, as the target stands for government, is effectively net zero because the renewable mix on board of it, those buildings will be net zero in performance because they're electrified. That's essentially the way it works, while as best as possible bringing down the energy demand by improving the fabric. So they're the 4 big policy documents that guide a lot of this and create some of the opportunity for us. On the next slide, there's one more important aspect when it comes to buildings that matters a lot, certainly for me and some of my colleagues, and that's around the health risks associated with buildings. For most people now, the buildings we spend our time in our homes, our offices create the biggest health risk for us. In the UK a few years ago, a young boy called Bishak died just before his second birthday because of black mold in the flat that he lived in. This has led to something called Awab's Law, which now puts the onus very much, particularly on rented accommodation, on the landlord to tackle any issue where we've raised the challenge of around black mold immediately. And this put this better focus on the indoor health associated with buildings. As you can see in the next slide, I don't go into a lot of detail, but a lot of the indoor physics of a building can have a huge effect on various types of illnesses, can either cause or exacerbate a whole range of different chronic conditions, from asthma in children through to how well you can cope with dementia or blood pressure or respiratory conditions. You can see here as temperature drops down and we get cold homes in the winter in the UK, this is a societal cost, because those people then present to our health system and we are paying to treat the symptoms that are generated in those residents rather than dealing with the underlying problem, which is an unfit home. So on the next slide, I'll now talk about why we need innovation. I deliver innovation programs and have done for 20 years now. And really, there's two big challenges as we've set from those kind of trends. The first one is productivity within the built environment sector, and this simultaneous need to reduce the carbon emissions because of the Climate Change Act. We have a sector, however, that's way too focused on inputs and far too little on outcomes. I'll kind of explain what I mean by that on the next slide. So if you look, and you saw some updated numbers, these are slightly outdated numbers, but McKinsey did a report for us a while ago to understand the comparison between a kind of CapEx cost, which is the outputs of the construction sector, and the outcomes it delivers for society. And the kind of bottom line here is to say that something like almost a half of UK GDP is enabled by the assets that the built environment sector put in place within the UK. And if we can focus on making sure those assets perform better and boost the productivity for everything that's associated with, rather than just the sector itself, that represents an even bigger economic opportunity. So what's the problem and challenge behind that? Well, then on the next slide, this is the way I look at it. The first side, the left-hand side, is really the kind of situation we have today, where buildings are assessed that were they built as that they were designed, as designed output. So we have energy performance certificates, which again are an estimate where we assume the performance, it will meet the design, and that every building is effectively a prototype. We don't build any two buildings the same way, certainly not to the level that the manufacturing sector would consider. And this is one of my favourite pictures to show, because it's very clear there's a big gap in the wall and the builders find this hilarious. And this is largely down to our the kind of on-site, low tolerance, manual-led approach to construction. We are moving as a sector towards creating flows of data on as built, so monitored, observed and verified data that gives you a measured performance on that building. Everything from the energy efficiency performance through to some of the health aspects we just talked about. And that creates feedback loops back into the design of those buildings. If we keep building and start to standardize some components and dimensions within building sets more and more, we can start to really learn from what we're doing and optimize them. And rather than coming up with a new design for every building, start to standardize some parts of the way we build them and put our focus instead on the outcomes. In the next slide, what that means is starting to think about things like the whole process of construction and delivery. And as part of a big program we did with something called the Construction Innovation Hub a few years ago, we built parts of a school and a hospital with different components built from different supply chains, and they only came together when they reached site. So the rules that were laid down for that meant that they knew how those components would come together, and this is part of that vision for what the future would look like. That included, at the bottom, you can see some laser cut rebar for some concrete foundations. More expensive to deliver, but far more accurate and longer lasting. The contractors for this work, Balfour Beatty, a big company here in the UK, were not part of the programme up until now. And when they took this contract on, said to us, they didn't think it would work. They were complete skeptics for this, but they said they'll do the work anyway. By the end of the project, they were complete converts, and starting to use these kind of laser cut rebar footings in some of their work. What it meant was the accuracy of where that putting that in place meant every step downstream after that was more efficient. And sometimes that means taking a whole process view rather than we'll try and cut costs on one little part of the sector, even if that then creates problems downstream. So it's that optimizing the whole process rather than everyone's individual components. Next slide, please. The other huge opportunity when you take it together, when you're thinking about the electrification journey that the built environment has to go on, is that we're going to start to move towards our buildings being active components of the energy system. They're not just going to be loads that are taking and drawing energy and using it. They'll be the route that we're connecting our electric vehicles, our heat pumps. They'll be able to generate their own energy through photovoltaics and other forms, store in batteries and hot water tanks, and manage their interaction with the energy network to make it more resilient and more flexible and able to take more renewables on board. We're seeing quite a shift now in smart tariffs and combinations and the desire for microgrids as the UK's energy system itself needs these to be able to have that flexibility and resilience as it takes on more renewables. So it's a huge, huge drive. Next slide. Coming back to that data component I said about digital tools, allowing us to get much better data on the buildings that we already have. So we're planning our upgrades of our buildings in a more efficient way, making sure that we're delivering the lowest cost but best outcome performance of that building, verifying all of that, and using that data to unlock green finance. Banks in the UK say we need data, we don't need EPC guesswork to be able to plan that journey. And this is where some of the most interesting innovations now happening in the UK in terms of retrofit. On the next slide, the other big, so all this starts to come together in some of the programs I've been delivering on heat. But in terms of how we move forward to a sector that delivers all of this in a very different way, we have something that you would want to engage with if you were to work in the UK, and that's the Industrialising and Digitalising Construction Challenge. This is a national R&D programme trying to develop a new model for government to procure construction in a different way, using a digital marketplace that actually analyses the government's 10-year pipeline and starts to match that up to the manufacturers that could provide the solutions. The aim is to really move towards an industrialised model for construction that's much more like the manufacturing sector. Happy to elaborate that in the Q&A, although the details of all of this are still emerging. So one last slide before I finish, and that's to give a few examples of the kind of companies that we're engaged with and working with all the time in the UK. And in the programs I do, that are European overseas companies. So we've got a few here now that are doing some major projects and becoming more and more involved in the kind of things we've just been talking about in delivering retrofit and upgrades of homes at scale, creating active buildings and delivering much more industrialized building solutions. So I'll finish with a last slide just to help you stay in touch. Please do, if you're interested in any of the work we're doing around decarbonising buildings, please scan the QR code or use the short link at the top there. If you just click one more time, you should start to see an animation. This is the world's first kit of parts office building built by Landsec in London with the support of our innovation programme. This is one of the most efficient deliveries of a building ever, and really is a great example of that industrialisation approach that we talked about. And again, very happy to elaborate on that later. But back to you, Peter.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. That was I'm impressed you kept within time there with all those slides. And there's a lot to go back on. I will say to everyone, just to reiterate, the presentations will be available after this session. So if you want to go back over some of that, you can. And if you want to put some questions into the chat box, we will get to those after our next two presentations. Okay, I'm going to hand straight on over now to Andreas. Andreas, over to you.
Vielen Dank. Ich wurde gebeten, auf Deutsch zu sprechen. Schönen guten Nachmittag. Ich darf ein bisschen was erzählen, was wir bei Internorm hier in UK erleben. Ich erzähle weniger über den Marktaufbau, wie wir uns Marketing oder sonst irgendwie aufstellen, sondern die Unterschiede, die ich irgendwie jetzt im letzten halben Jahr herausgefunden habe oder die uns sehr, sehr stark beschäftigen hier in UK, als in Österreich eher größeres Industrieunternehmen und hier in UK als kleineres, mittleres Unternehmen, wo wir versuchen, den Markt zu erobern. Nächste Folie bitte. Der Markt aus unserer Sicht zeichnet sich besonders dadurch aus, ich habe das Wort CPDs aufgeschrieben, das heißt Continuous Professional Development. Das ist ein Programm, wo Architekten nachweisen müssen, dass sie gewisse Punkte an Ausbildungen pro Jahr quasi an Ausbildung machen. Das ist etwas, wo wir Programme vorbereitet haben und gemeinsam entwickelt haben. Die werden dann vom Royal Institute of British Architects abgenommen und mit diesen Programmen bilden wir Architekten aus, natürlich quasi mit den Produktvorteilen und Spezifikationen, die uns beschäftigen und die uns besonders hervorheben. Warum erwähne ich das? Architekten sind in anderen europäischen Märkten, Österreich, Deutschland, zwar auch sehr stark da, aber wesentlich weniger geschäftsentscheidend als in UK. Da läuft wahnsinnig viel über Architekten und man sieht es auch, die Landschaft, man braucht sie nur anschauen, ist derartig kreativ und was da Geld ausgegeben wird, ist also für uns extrem beeindruckend. Ich erwähne auch das Wort Passivhaus, das ist etwas, was uns in Österreich und Deutschland schon länger nicht mehr so stark beschäftigt, was in UK ein ganz, ganz massiver Trend ist. Unsere Elemente können das, da ist die Qualität gefragt und dadurch, dass die Regierung das sehr stark reglementiert, was in Zukunft alles gebaut werden darf und wie stark das quasi in Richtung Passivhaus gehen soll, sind wir da eigentlich sehr gut aufgestellt. Herr Müller hat schon erwähnt, wir sind eher ein Nischenprodukt, aber eben die Qualität, die wir liefern können, ist hier sehr stark nachgefragt und dadurch ist das Potenzial sehr groß. Wir teilen unsere Märkte in zwei große Bereiche. Domestic, der Privatbereich, ist selbstverständlich unser größter. Da arbeiten wir immer im zweistufigen Vertrieb. Was hier anders ist also das Nettoeinkommen. Also mit dem Nettoeinkommen wird 75% fürs Wohnen hier in UK ausgegeben. Das ist die letzte Zahl, die ich erhalten habe, während 40% in Österreich. Das heißt, es hat eine ganz andere Bedeutung und es wird auch ganz anders investiert hier in UK. Die wohlhabende Schicht auf der anderen Seite ist sehr, sehr groß, natürlich auch also die Anzahl der Menschen, die wirklich viel Geld haben. Und dort wird sehr häufig über Architekten quasi auch im privaten Bereich gebaut, gebildet. Es ist ein ganz anderer Anspruch, auch was unsere Vertriebspartner betrifft und was unsere Kunden betrifft. Sehr, sehr positiv, was den Anspruch betrifft, ist natürlich auch herausfordernd, wenn es darum geht, wenn mal was nicht so funktioniert, haben Sie die Anwälte also gleich sehr, sehr intensiv hier. Und da ist auch rechtlich ein relativ großer Unterschied, dass Sie als Lieferant, auch wenn Sie einen Partner haben, der dann das Geschäft abwickelt, dass sie sich nicht komplett aus dem Geschäft rausziehen können. Das ist kein reines B2B-Geschäft, sondern sobald Gefahr für Leib und Leben besteht, sind sie auch in der Haftung drinnen, was das Ganze auch sehr viel heikler macht. Messen, ich erwähne es hier deswegen, weil das in Österreich und Deutschland in letzter Zeit ein bisschen rückläufig war. Hier und da gibt es noch Messen, die ganz gut funktionieren, aber die spielen hier wirklich eine große Rolle und sind ein wesentlicher, liefern einen wesentlichen Beitrag, was Leads betrifft. Ja, soweit zum Domestic-Bereich, Commercial-Bereich. Das ist der einzige Bereich eigentlich weltweit, den wir direkt bedienen, weil die Bautätigkeit in UK so groß ist und auch hier sehr stark architektengetrieben ist, in unglaublich hoher und guter Qualität zum Teil, was so Projekte betrifft, die genau zugeschnitten sind auf die Art der Produkte, die wir mit österreichischer Qualität bereitstellen können. Was besonders herauszuheben ist, ich habe die drei Begriffe Delivery Only, Design und Fitting hier erwähnt. Delivery Only ist das, was wir normalerweise in Objekten eigentlich überall als intern umsonst machen, dass wir tatsächlich also die Waren natürlich designen, aber zur Verfügung stellen. Aber ob das jetzt statisch in Ordnung ist, ob das jetzt von den Vorgaben passt, das ist etwas, was normalerweise von Planern, Statikern durchgeführt wird oder von Architekten selbst. Genauso auch die Montage wird von separaten Firmen gemacht. Hier wird erwartet, dass man das als GU gemeinsam anbietet. Und da gibt es tatsächlich gerade bei den größeren Bauherren Heerscharen von Rechtsanwälten, mit denen man dann zu tun hat, beziehungsweise mit, ich habe es erwähnt, also steht hier 650 Seiten Terms and Conditions, was wir da uns durchgesehen haben, wo wir natürlich als Österreicher mit unseren rechtlichen Einschätzungen also komplett blank sind, muss ich ganz ehrlich sagen. Also da gibt es wirklich derartig scharfe Konditionen, da empfehle ich sehr, sich an die Außenhandelsstelle zu wenden und sich der lokale Rechtsanwälte empfehlen zu lassen. Mit denen kommt man da gut durch. Delivery Only ist etwas, wo man gut durchkommt und wo man sich auch, wenn der Bauherr sich darauf einlässt, eigentlich sehr gute Erfolge erzielen kann. Aber es gibt zum Beispiel auch, wir arbeiten mit Partnerfirmen zusammen, die also sehr viel größere Projekte auch im Fassadenbereich machen, die sagen, also es gibt Bauherren, die auch zu den größten zählen, mit denen sie niemals Geschäfte machen würden, weil es einfach wirklich sehr, sehr gefährliche Terms and Conditions gibt, wo man extrem aufpassen muss. Nächste Seite bitte. Ja, Logistik, Besonderheiten, Transportkosten sind ein riesiges Thema. Jetzt besonders, ist ohnehin logisch, seit dem Brexit sind immer weniger Speditionen bereit oder auch in der Lage, alle Erfordernisse abzudecken, die es in UK gibt. Wir arbeiten zusammen mit Bardina und Schenker. Da haben wir endlich sehr gute Erfahrungen gemacht. Die sind spezialisiert auf den Markt. Die haben Stückgut, aber auch Containerfrachten, die sie hier einbringen. Das, was wir sehr stark merken, obwohl eben unsere Produkte keinen Zoll haben, ist die Einfuhrpapier- und Umsatzsteuerabwicklung extrem aufwendig. Jetzt nur eine Zahl dazu. Wir zahlen alleine nur für die Papiererstellung um die 150.000 Pfund im Jahr. Bei einem Umsatz von grob 15 Millionen Pfund ist das also ein extrem hoher Anteil. Da überlegen wir eben auch selbstständig zu werden und unsere Mitarbeiter eben in entsprechende Schulungen zu schicken, um das selber zu machen. Die ersten Schritte in diese Richtung haben gezeigt, es ist wirklich extrem aufwendig und mit jeder Menge Hürden versehen. Produkte-Normen, EU-Normen gelten nicht. Es gibt ganz eigene Vorgaben, Regeln, die jetzt im Sinne der EU-Normen, die wir kennen, sehr, sehr ähnlich sind, aber eigene Prüfungen erfordern. Wir prüfen selbst, da haben wir gute Erfahrungen gemacht. Mit lokalen Prüfinstituten arbeiten wir seit Jahren zusammen und alles, was wir hier in den Markt hineinbringen wollen, wird auch entsprechend geprüft und gelabelt. Bei den Gläsern vielleicht das Beispiel, wir sind es eher gewöhnt von den Rechtssystemen jetzt in Österreich, Deutschland, Schweiz zum Beispiel, dass es lösungsorientierte Vorgaben gibt. Das heißt, man muss jetzt entsprechende, Windlasten oder ähnliche Dinge erfüllen können. Hier ist es so, dass wirklich sehr, sehr spezifisch vorgeschrieben wird, welche Arten von Gläsern in einer gewissen Höhe, in einer gewissen Einbausituation gebraucht werden, was das Ganze sehr, sehr speziell und teilweise auch sehr kostspielig macht. Auf der anderen Seite wieder flexible Unternehmen, die sich solcher Nischen bedienen können und dort auch gute Qualität leisten können, eigentlich wieder einen Vorteil bringt. Aber es war extrem überraschend, dass wir also teilweise Dinge, die wir in anderen Ländern genau mit den gleichen Vorgaben lösen und auch als Beispiele bringen können, dass die hier in UK nicht erlaubt sind, weil sie eben hier ganz, ganz genau vorschreiben, wie was umgesetzt werden soll. Mitarbeiterarbeitsrecht, da war letzte Woche ein ausgezeichnetes Webinar über die aktuellen Entwicklungen der Außenhandelsstelle, wo ich dabei sein durfte. Ich kann davon ein großes Lied singen, also die Arten, wie man mit Mitarbeitern umgeht, die Kündigungsmöglichkeiten sind extrem anders als bei uns in Österreich. Und ich empfehle dringendst, nachdem hier selbst teilweise Anwaltskanzleien über Kündigungsfirmen mit ihren Mitarbeitern, also sich von ihren Mitarbeitern trennen, wenn das mal notwendig sein sollte, sich eben davor im Vorhinein zu informieren und auch wirklich sehr, sehr generalstabsmäßig vorzubereiten, sollte man mit Mitarbeitern nicht mehr so glücklich sein. Und das wird in Zukunft noch schwieriger werden, weil wir aktuell eine Phase von 2 Jahren haben, wo man sich gut anschauen kann, ob der Mitarbeiter ins Team passt. In Zukunft wird das 6 Monate sein und nach 6 Monaten ist es also wirklich extrem herausfordernd, sich von Mitarbeitern zu trennen. Es gibt hier nur 12 Gehälter, keine automatischen KV-Erhöhungen, wie wir es gewohnt sind. Das sind so die größten Unterschiede. Personalverrechnung selbst machen wir nur über Wirtschaftsprüfer. Andere Besonderheiten. Ja, Firmenbuch ist komplett öffentlich, heißt ja Companies House, ist sehr, sehr transparent. Wie unser Firmenbuch braucht man keine Gebühren zahlen, um das einzusehen. Was auf der anderen Seite auch, wenn Sie sich eintragen wollen, zur Folge hat, dass also Ihre gesamten Adressen und alles eben öffentlich einsichtig ist. Man kann die Adressen der Firma quasi hineinsetzen, zum Beispiel, wenn man sich jetzt selber als Geschäft oder wenn man handelnde Personenmanager einträgt, ist zu empfehlen, weil sonst wird man da entsprechend auch kontaktiert. Audits, Banken, Wirtschaftsprüfer, Audits haben wir gerade hinter uns. Ist nicht viel anders als bei uns. Es ist sehr, sehr speziell bei manchen Prozessen. Jetzt, wenn ich zum Beispiel, bei uns gibt es ein Melderegister, das wird hier ganz anders gehandhabt, wenn man beweisen will, dass man irgendwo wohnt, also jetzt nicht in UK, aber in Österreich wohnt, dann werden vom Finanzamt Gehaltszettel verlangt, aber das ist nicht das, was sie eigentlich wollen, weil in UK gibt es das HMRC, also das Finanzamt hier, das die Adressen genau kennt, das bei uns eben bei unserem Gehaltszettel nicht drauf ist. Solche Dinge werden anders gelöst oder muss man eben vorher mit den Behörden abstimmen, damit sie akzeptieren, dass zum Beispiel unsere Melderegistereinträge oder Ähnliches akzeptiert werden. Auch bei Banken ist es genau das Gleiche. Also da gibt's zum Beispiel, muss man einen Nachweis über laufende Wasserrechnungen zu Hause machen. Da aber bei uns die meisten Wasserrechnungen von Gemeinden kommen, werden sie in UK also nicht akzeptiert, weil es keine Firma ist und solche Kleinigkeiten gibt es halt zu bedenken. Geschäftsführer nicht aus UK, wie ich zum Beispiel. Ich bin von Montag bis Donnerstag hier, aber wohne nicht hier, habe auch nicht vor zu emigrieren. Ist eine ganz besondere, seit letztem Jahr Regelung oder sind ganz besondere Regelungen einzuhalten. Es gibt eine sogenannte Sponsorship License, das heißt, es wird die Firma geprüft, ob sie überhaupt, korrigieren Sie mich bitte, wenn ich das nicht rechtlich ausreichend genau formuliere, aber es wird eine Firma geprüft, ob ihr erlaubt werden kann, dass sie Ausländer wie mich zum Beispiel jetzt beschäftigt. Dann darf man einen Vertrag machen. Diesen Vertrag darf ich also quasi vorlegen und der wird auch geprüft, ob der in Ordnung ist. Und dann gibt es ein Visum, da wird auch eingeschätzt, welches Visum dann entsprechend gilt. Da gibt es eine sehr gute Unterstützung. Wir sind noch immer in diesem Prozess der Sponsorship License und wir sind frohgemut, dass das bald gelöst werden wird. Betriebsstättenrisiko auf der anderen Seite wird jetzt von den Anwälten, die mit Immigration zu tun haben, nicht bewertet. Das muss man wieder mit den Wirtschaftsprüfern klären. Es gibt natürlich ein Betriebsstättenrisiko in beide Richtungen. Einerseits eben das Interesse der UK-Behörden, eben auch Steuern der Muttergesellschaft beziehen zu können und auf der anderen Seite in Österreich eigentlich genau das Gleiche. Das gilt sehr sorgfältig abzuwägen und entsprechend mit einem passenden Vertrag und auch Vertragssplitting dann entsprechend zu eliminieren, dieses Risiko. Trivia, so Dinge wie Fensterputzer ist etwas, was wir nicht gewöhnt sind in Österreich. Wir haben zum Beispiel nur eine Werbung gemacht, wie besonders leicht unsere Fenster zu reinigen sind im Rahmen. Das interessiert hier niemanden, weil niemand seine Fenster selber putzt. Da gibt es, wie gesagt, Fensterputzer dazu. Trickle Vents, das sind Lüfter in den Fenstern, die von der Baubehörde vorgeschrieben sind, die auch bei Abnahmen eben auch entsprechend gezeigt werden können für Firmen, wo wir besonders dichte und energieeffiziente Fenster bauen, ist es etwas sehr überraschend gewesen, dass man dann ein Loch hineinschneidet, wo entsprechend dann die Luft reinkommt. Also alles, was das Fenster kann, eigentlich damit wieder unmöglich macht, ist hier zum Teil vorgeschrieben und wahnsinnig schwer anders eben zu lösen. Heißwasserspender in jedem Büro, so wichtig wie bei unseren Kaffeemaschinen, wird hier für den Tee Heißwasserspender gemacht. Persönlich muss ich sagen, fühlen wir uns alle hier sehr, sehr wohl. Es ist quasi vom Umgang wesentlich höflicher als bei uns. Allerdings, das gilt nicht im Autofahren. Da ist doch durchaus in London das eine Herausforderung, muss ich sagen. Aber macht sehr viel Spaß. Ja, soweit mein Beitrag dazu. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Andreas. That was yeah, it's a good point. I never wash my windows either, so thanks very much for that very good, concise report on how to do business here in the UK, and a good example of how you identify your niches and your strengths and work accordingly. I would quickly say that the webinar that Andreas mentioned about the legal frameworks around employment here in the UK is also available on our social media website. So let us know if you want a link to that afterwards. As you mentioned, Andreas, the importance of trade shows. I will now hand over to Eleanor Hall, who is from the 19 group, who organise the trade show that we're hoping to be bringing you all to, some of you to, in November. That's London Build, which is co-located with Elemental London to make it one of the biggest platforms here in the UK. Eleanor.
Hello, thank you very much everyone for having me. So as Peter mentioned, I'm here to talk to you briefly about why London Build and Elemental London would provide a strong opportunity to meet the UK market. So London Build is the UK's leading and largest construction and design event, co-located with Elemental London, which is an event focused on advancing the efficiency of buildings and sits as the UK's only commercial, industrial and large-scale residential HVAC exhibition in the UK. They're taking place together at the end of November at the Excel in London and represent the full supply chain from the built environment, so from start to finish. And my role here is to work with organisations in the built environment and construction sector and help them create new business opportunities within this market. So looking at this slide that we have here, and this is just giving you an overview and an idea of the scale of the event, London Build and Elemental London. And what makes it special is the fact that it combines exhibition, conference content. So we have over 900 speakers across 17 conference stages. All of our conference contents are CPD accredited, networking opportunities, as well as meet the buyer opportunities all under one roof. So 25,000 attendees, 900 speakers, and 650 exhibitors. So you're sort of starting to get an idea of the scale and depth of the event and why it's sort of a strong opportunity for both brand visibility, but also business development within the UK built environment sector. Moving on quickly to the next slide, I have picked out, this is just a snapshot of some of our key pillars of the event. As I mentioned, London Build and Elemental are representing the entire built environment supply chain, so everything from architecture to materials, modern methods of construction, to sort of climate solutions. These themes represent, that I've picked out here, some of the biggest priorities in the construction and built environment sector at the moment. So those that are facing high regulation and demand to innovate. So as Mike touched on, sort of areas like fire safety, health and safety, areas that are sort of highly regulated and ensuring safety within the construction sector. Modern methods of construction, so like the project Mike was highlighting, increasing efficiency of construction projects in the UK. We're also looking, so when we talk about climate solutions, that is all about, that's represented by Elemental London. So that's all about the decarbonisation of buildings, HVAC services and solutions that are going to help the UK get to those net zero targets that have been set out by the government by 2030, both by retrofit, but also by new build projects as well. And sustainability is a key focus, a major theme across both exhibitions. It's represented across all of our stages. And as you know, based on the presentation that Mike gave earlier today, the event is very much geared towards helping the UK get towards these sort of net zero targets, reach the safety regulations that we need to do. So our conference content is a very big factor and part of what we do. This also shows you the sort of depth into the different construction areas and built environment section areas that we can offer at London Build and Elemental. They're going to help suppliers, service providers connect with the right types of people and based on the products and services that they have. The final slide from me, if we just move on to the next slide, is giving you a picture of who's going to be there. So who would you be likely to meet at London Build and Elemental if you were to join us? So for London Build, the major visitor profiles we have are contractors, architects, developers and house builders. So those are from major tier 1 and 2 contractors, developers, housing associations, architects, fire safety professionals and local authorities. With Elemental London, it's those who are specifying solutions that help with decarbonisation, so building service engineers, M&E contractors, facilities managers, sustainability professionals who are specifying climate solutions to help those buildings be more efficient. And this is the as a whole is where people who specify, purchase, make decisions are going to be coming to find new innovative suppliers. Some of the names that you can see under the attending companies, these are some of the UK's biggest contractors, developers, housing associations, and several of these companies bring very large multidisciplinary teams to this event. So some of these organisations are bringing 200 employees to the event, and they have chosen London Build and Elemental London to be a place where their procurement teams have their own exhibition stands, even in the Meet the Buyer area of the event. So their procurement teams, because of the the demand and changes in what we need to do sustainability wise and safety and regulation wise, their procurement teams need to expand their supply chain and networks, and they have chosen London Build as the platform to really lean into that and be able to do that. So yeah, essentially that's just a very quick snapshot into Elemental and London Build, and it's, as you can see, it's a great opportunity for companies who are looking to grow in the UK market, and it represents the supply chain from start to finish. Peter, I think, has said comms about how we're going to be working with Advantage Austria, so if there's any further interest in getting involved, do reach out to Peter, and he'll be able to share more with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eleanor. And yes, anybody who's interested in that, I put the link up to the where you can already sign up to be involved, and with all the other information that you need for participating if you're interested in participating in the Austrian Pavilion at the London Build Show, or give us a call in London. We've got time for a couple of questions. If anybody's got any questions, please do raise your hand or put the question in chat. Otherwise, I wanted to ask Mike, you were talking a lot about the change in the way that we're doing things and the change in the delivery of buildings. But to what extent are the major house builders really are they adapting? How are they engaging with the supply chain, or how can the supply chain engage with them?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think with major house builders, the challenge is always that they will sell at the rate that sustains the price for their homes. But I think it's a lot of you got to remember that the totality of the housing market means there's lots of social housing being built. There are some larger developers. There's larger developments happening now that are tied to bigger projects that are regeneration projects that are linked to retrofit. There's also a lot of smaller developers that are some of the ones driving the change in the market. But the demand we're starting to see now, along with the future home standards for higher quality homes, is creating a lot more opportunities, I think, for growth outside of the bigger housing providers. However, the ones that are, and you've just seen a list of quite a few of them, really are leaning on their supply chain to try things in a very different way. So they are looking at industrialization approaches. They are looking at a combination of technologies at a building level to make them active, to make them more better performing. And it's very much that engagement is happening in a much bigger way than it used to. And that's often where they're coming to us for some of the funding to try those things out and show homes that combine technologies and really test them for themselves and see what kind of things really, really work. So it's a great opportunity, I think, right now for if you've got solutions that work at the building level and are interoperable with other solutions that it's a combination of things. It's a good time.
So it's well worth seeking out their innovation teams or
very much so, yeah. And we can help with that. And I think really that's in all aspects. They're even really starting to look quite hard now at embodied carbon within the materials within the building as well. Then they obviously aren't as quite as innovative as some other developers, but yeah, they are paying a lot of attention to that as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. There's a couple of questions coming in actually. So we've got a question. Someone's raised their hand. I don't know. Can we, Elena? Can we unmute? Maybe she would like to.
Yes, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Super. Thank you so much for the very interesting presentations. I have a question regarding the certifications and also the standards, since it was also mentioned in Mr. Kaufmann's presentation. And I'm wondering, is this cost, because usually this is the highest cost, of doing a market entry in a different country. So how is this cost covered maybe how was it in the case of Internorm? Is there some kind of support offered, maybe grant support for this? Or if you can maybe share a little bit on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andreas.
Yeah, actually, no. You have to earn the money yourself in order to invest. But on the other hand, this is exactly the route we are going, and passive house certifications things we are doing anyway. So it's not that much of an effort, but you have to do it. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, in fact, it was very much a question that was I was thinking of asking myself. You mentioned. Because we get it. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Mike. But we get a lot of questions about, do I need that certification, this certification? And I kind of, the answer is sort of, you don't need it, but you do need it for the market. But I suppose it depends also on the product.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we could have talked about it, but it would have been another 20 minutes. It very much varies depending on whether it's a retrofit or is it an evolution of an existing product? So it's a whole new product. Do you want to market on those angles? Yeah, there's no short answer on that. There's and a lot of the standards are published by the British Standards Institute, and you have to pay to access them and understand how you comply. Yeah, it is one of the barriers to innovation. It's one we're working on for UK businesses that are innovative product. We can offer some support to help them get through that faster, but it does vary hugely from area to area, and I'm not a deep expert.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's an example too of where you've got to be prepared to invest. The market's not a quick. in and out in the UK market. I think if you have to make a decision and say that's a market which is interesting for me in the long term, therefore the investment in certainly initially getting those certifications is therefore justified. We've got a comment actually on pretty much on this topic. So from Laszlo Lep, we are the Passive House Institute. We know them very well. A private independent research institute specializing in energy efficient construction. Have been working on passive house concept for over 30 years and are keen to establish new contacts in the UK. Interested in participating in trade fairs. Very good. We'd be very happy to have you along. Perhaps we should speak afterwards, Laszlo. Is it possible to speak about new construction and renovation concepts? Is that a question whether you want to speak about them? Where's Laszlo? Or is that a question about would you like someone to illuminate more on those topics? I think
interest in speaking about them, we can certainly look at, we have 17 conferences across the event. So, for sure, it may be interesting if you want to get in touch directly.
I think so, because I mean, obviously the Passive House Institute is, you'll probably be aware of them, affiliated, and Passive House in Austria, of course, one of the founding sort of companies of it, if you like. So that might be a conversation that we should have afterwards, and we'd be very happy to put you in contact as well, Laszlo. I mean, I don't know if, Mike, whether there's any tie-in you have with the Passive House fraternity here in the UK as well. We have a UK Passive House Institute as well, UK Passive House Trust rather as well. So
there is, yeah. And I was just putting in the chat now that Scotland's developing a passive house equivalent. It's ahead of the rest of the UK. It's worth noting, particularly as I'm Welsh, that there's there's 4 nations makes up the UK, and they all work slightly differently. But yeah, generally the standards and regulations are a little bit more advanced and easier to manoeuvre in Scotland, and certainly some innovators have got moving there faster, and I think they're implementing some higher standards for new build there faster, and some of the best net zero developments are happening in Wales, because we have a piece of legislation called the Future Generations Act, where we have to think about sustainability in everything that's done. So yeah, it's an interesting environment in that respect in the UK. It might be that actually it's easier to work with one of the smaller nations, and I know Austrians know about this.
I think this is, and we would very much like to. We will put you in contact, Laszlo, and it's something we'd like to explore anyway. We are in contact with some of the organisations in Scotland too, so perhaps that's something that we can develop further. But let's talk afterwards, and we'll put you in contact too with Eleanor about possible speaking opportunities, and get a conversation going after the event. If you want to now, I believe we've actually now managed to unmute you. Did you want to?
Yeah, now, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Now I'm able to unmute my microphone. Yeah, thank you very much for this information. What I would be interested is, to do presentations, to be a speaker on different fairs like London Build, or for example, not an exhibitor, because we are not a production company or a manufacturer, but providing a lot of knowledge and know-how in case of energy efficient buildings for the last 30 years, and we do certify buildings and components and people like the Passive House Trust, and yeah, very keen to be part of this London Build Fair, for example. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, and that's so. Let's have that conversation afterwards, and we'll put you in contact. I think we've got time. Well, we've got it. We had time for one last question. I think Mike's already answered in chat, but just for those who didn't see, it's product specific. But how about infrared heating with innovative infrared storage heating panels? Is this electric heating solution still okay, or is just a heat pump the focus? Is it just a focus on heat pumps? We have a focus on heat pumps, don't we? But as Mike has said, it is okay, and the standards have been developed at the moment. is that right, for specifically for infrared?
It's being developed now with a group of infrared manufacturers now, together with some funding from the net zero department in the government, so that there can be a good comparison between different technologies. I think it's particularly useful in very high fabric performance buildings, where a heat pump's probably unnecessary and wouldn't operate so efficiently. So okay. It's really is it is a part of the mix. I mean, our building mix is so strange in the UK that there's no one answer for everything, although the government's very committed to heat pumps.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know, actually, because I know there's one or two Austrian companies in that space. So, okay, if there are no other questions coming in, we've run a little bit over time, so I'll thank everybody for staying on, and I'll thank all our speakers, Mike, Andreas, Elena. Thank you very much for being very concise, very clear. I think we're okay to give out the presentations after this, and there will be on our YouTube channel there will be a recording of this as well. So for those that want to go back over that, pour back over the detail, please do that. And in the meantime, I thank you all for attending. Any other questions, do come back to us. You've got our contact details, and we are happy to put them over to any of our speakers after the event as well. Okay, thank you very much for listening.